or representative of the shareholder, do you have any intention to follow this kind of an occurrence? Because you represent the public in a number of entities which are or in the same defines, and they ought to be protected dearly in terms of the security standards. That these kinds of things shouldn't recur, and if it did, as it has somewhat happened, some form of reprisal ought to be one of the things that ought to be observed in a way. What is your undertaking around this key aspect, which is now is experience of everybody who has got interest in as far as this asset is concerned? Thank you very much, Chair.
Right, let's get a response to that. No, just his Robson was leaving. Yes.
No, the undertaking.
It's just as one, so he's leaving.
Okay. I think your point is a fair one, and it does give us some lessons that we can learn from this incident. It does give us an opportunity to think about, for example, what you include in the memorandum of incorporation. That might be different from what we have now to defend ourselves against these sorts of incidents in the future. And thirdly, I think the board should give consideration to the violation of the contract of employment, where confidentiality is required. Now, I mean, you can't litigate against someone who says XYZ dresses like this, or ABC looks like this, or whatever the case might be. Those are his personal observations. But if there's an Eskom-related matter in either the utterances or in the book or in any other publication that he's responsible for, which violates that, I think it's clause 15 of his employment contract, then the board must consider pursuing that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Mams the Bull.
Thank you very much, Chair, through you. I don't want to waste a lot of time because some other issues are covered by the members. There is the point here I want to raise with the Minister. I want to check, Minister, on the issue of Eskom project. Do you think, with your own knowledge, that it will end soon? The project, what the Ruyter and his friends endorsed. Also, the issue of precedent on the issue of vetting is very, very crucial. And it showed that he didn't care about the superiors of him. He just did whatever he wanted to do. I thank you.
So on the question of vetting, I think we need some interaction with SSA, particularly in these sorts of positions where several of you have raised this concern, and set up some kind of interactive mechanism so that they inform us about the progress that they're making. We also have to rethink, when is the vetting done? So ideally, it should be done before you take up your appointment, not after you take up your appointment. That's my view as we sit here today. So we will reflect on some of those lessons, and see what changes can be made and what kind of oversight mechanisms we need to put in place, which will ensure that this kind of slippage doesn't occur in future. How soon will the project end? I think everybody is going to learn some serious lessons from the behavior of this gentleman, whether it's the business people that supported him, whether it's the media that writes about him, or refuses to write about him, and some of the stuff he's talking about, and ourselves as well. So I think the project is probably dead now. But the law enforcement authorities must pursue what they have to do. So if there's any evidence that is available, it must be provided to them. And they must evaluate that evidence, investigate whatever needs to be investigated, and do whatever it is that they're obliged to do in terms of the law at the same time. So I can't say it's going to end tomorrow because I'm not controlling it. But the key is the consequence. Is there material there that the law enforcement agencies can act on or not? And will they act on it or not? That only you and they can interact on. And we'll know the results in the next few months as to where this project actually goes. So thank you very much.
Thank you much. I'm taking now my 15 minutes. Yes. No, don't worry, I won't be there long enough. But Minister, I do have questions. And I want to build on the statement that you started with, that there is state capture 1 and now there is state capture 2, albeit the qualification that you made that it would have taken a different form. Now, that being the case, on which I wholeheartedly agree with you on numerous occasions and on various platforms, I've made the point that we must not be deluded into the thinking that state capture is the reality of the past. Now, where I'm going with this, Minister, is that listening to you now, there's quite clearly a trust deficit and trust erosion as we are seated here between yourself and Mr. Ruyter. I want to assume this was not an event, but a process. Because Mr. Ruyter had your support and he enjoyed your confidence at the outset of his tenure. What changed? I ask this question in the context that I would assume that holding a view that there is state capture continuing, a trusted CEO comes to the shareholder representative with information that there are 2 ministers or 2 senior politicians involved in the corruption taking place at Eskom, it should raise red flags. And therefore set into motion a process which would say his allegations must be tested so that we do not find ourselves at ground zero, for lack of a better phrase, insofar as what the State Capture Commission revealed. So why weren't the allegations tested when Mr. Ruyter made them? Because quite clearly, as we are seated here, none of us were aware that he was writing a book, so there would have been no need for any suspicion. None of us seated here, when he made the allegation, knew that he would have a bombshell public interview. And as the point was made to the board last week, when he made the allegations, he was still firmly a CEO of the public entity. And therefore, we had all the jurisdiction to hold him to account, and he had to make the necessary information available. So that's why I keep going to the point that the book, for all intents and purposes, yes, must be probed, it must be linked to, but as we are seated here, it's secondary to the moments in which Mr. Ruyter made the allegations that he made, and I would want to assume formally and officially because he was talking to his principals, either the board, the chairperson, or the shareholder representative. So I'm interested, Minister Uti, why weren't his allegations acted on? Because at the time that he made them, he was in an official position of authority. That is point number one. And I raise this strongly now parallel to the issue you have raised of state capture. The second point is around the fundamental issue of vetting, and you've said you have looked at it, but I want to touch on it to drive home the following point. The Cabinet took a decision in 2014 that all persons in the SCM space must be vetted. And it goes, and then of course the CEO and so on. I take the point that it's the timing of when that must happen. But didn't it ever worry you, concern you, of issue to you, that we had a key critical SOE, such as Eskom, with an unvetted CEO? And not that the matter was never raised. The matter was raised on numerous occasions, including but not limited to reports that Eskom itself submitted to Parliament. And the point was persistently made that the CEO is not vetted. Now, the consequence, adversely, of that becomes this. Mr. Ruyter then embarks on an intelligence operation, unvetted as he is. And we are now saddled with the situation of an elusive report which has got material bearing, because we haven't tested what's contained therein, but got a material bearing on what's happening or what happened at Eskom. So now that's the dilemma. It baffles the mind. And of course, this will have to be probed. How did those doing the investigation access information at Eskom? So already we are saddled with the security breach of Eskom information, as they were investigating Eskom in all the material respects, at the behest of its CEO. So unvetted, breach of security and information, and an intelligence operation. Shouldn't we, seated here right now, be told that there are concrete action steps being taken to pursue the matter to protect Eskom? It worries me that the seriousness of the issues that have been raised and the events that have occurred arising out of the leak, now that there's an intelligence report, the interview that Mr. Ruyter has and the utterances that is made in, that none of those issues are being pursued. Unless they are, and we haven't been told, and if they are, how are they being actually pursued? I want to conclude by saying, Minister, unless Cabinet takes a concrete decision to firm up the efficiency and effectiveness of the State Security Agency in its vetting processes and protocols, it is going to be a major contributory factor to the collapse of the state. The Eskom board, for the longest of time after its interviews, was not vetted. It took forever. You are saddled with the National Commissioner of Police right now, who's not vetted. The CEO of Eskom was not vetted. Some over 300 persons at Eskom who are supposed to be vetted have not been vetted. So I just flag that particular aspect to say it will continue to form part of your headaches as you pursue to appoint a new CEO at Eskom. There has to be decisiveness from Cabinet side on this one. I finally ask then, Minister, after Mr. Ruyter had made the allegation about the 2 senior politicians and 2 senior ministers, in light of your own account or observation of state capture continuing, did you inform the president of this serious allegation? Because I'm going to put the same question next week to Dr. Mufamadi as well. Because I would imagine that an individual in a position of authority, like the CEO, making an allegation saying so and so and so and so, like if I were to come to Mr. Frolick, who's the House Chair responsible for committees, and I say, Honorable Hadebe and Honorable Lees are leaking committee documents, my expectation is that he would report the matter to the Speaker and it would be investigated. Because I'm not making this allegation, or would not be making it post my term of office. I'm making it in office and raising a flag to say there's a problem.
Thank you, Chair. Well, let's start with the last point that you raised. If Mr. Lees and Mr. Hadebe were leaking documents, and if you were to take the matter to Mr. Frolick and say, I think these 2 gentlemen are involved in this activity, imagine Mr. Frolick, given his rigorousness, is going to ask you the question, what proof do you have? And if you have the proof, provide it to me, or provide it to the forensic firm I'm going to indicate to you. But you have to pass the test first, that you have some proof that is more than just maybe you personally angry with the 2 gentlemen because they upset you about something. So I think the same principle applies elsewhere, informing the president, or whatever the case might be. Is there sufficient weight here which would indicate that there is more than just information? And as I pointed out in my earlier presentation, some parts of the media said, we're not printing anything about this stuff because it's unsubstantiated. And I imagine they were worried about being involved in defamation cases, for example. In their case, they're doing it outside of parliamentary privilege as well. So the issue here, more pointedly, when you say, are these matters being pursued, are things being done about what Mr. De Ruyter is saying in relation to corruption? I pointed out right at the beginning that corruption has been on the radar screen, particularly since 2017. But there were hints of it long before that as well. And in Eskom's case, I refer you to the booklet that's in the files that we've given you about the kind of manner in which corruption was facilitated during the state capture period. So, and we've presented to you all the things, well, indications of all the things that have been done, because they're not all the things. I'm sure if Mr. Mutivi gets an opportunity, he'll say, out of the files we sent to them, they did X, Y, Z, or whatever the case might be. So this is certainly being pursued. The question, I think, that you can more validly ask, if I may respectfully say so, is, are we making a dent? Are we stopping corruption in the tracks? Are we disrupting lines of communication or collaboration between insiders and outsiders? I don't have any detailed knowledge, but I imagine that if you, and I think I wasn't able to obtain the latest numbers from the NICOM work stream in this regard, but I think there's sufficient happening which would be becoming a discouraging factor, because if one takes one's experience at SARS, the risk of you being caught out, the higher it gets, the less you're going to take a chance. Right? And so we need to increase the possibility that you will be detected. We need to increase the possibility that your acts are no longer ones of hidden behind the radar screen. And if they are easily detectable, then you are more than likely to face the consequences. One of the technologies being developed by ports elsewhere is something that we've forgotten about, but blockchain technology. So that the interaction between the port, the transporter, the customs authority, the shipping line, etc., is part of this blockchain technology. In that technology, if you touch the wrong button, your name is there, and you can then be pursued in that particular regard. Similar things can be done in our institutions as well. So there is, for example, in Transnet, a digitization process. It will take a little while to make some headway, but it will certainly give us a better risk assurance that, and a signal, a warning to those involved in nefarious activities that there's a greater possibility now of you being detected. If you take your minds back to 1999, 2000, when the SARS technology people talked about the development of a new income tax system. And they then said that that income tax system will be connected to a whole lot of third-party databases. So in certain countries, if you have a gym membership, it's recorded in the tax authority. If you buy a new car, it's recorded. If you pay cash for it, it'll be picked up, and so on. In South Africa, we're still a little bit behind the curve. But that created quite a fear amongst taxpayers and contributed partly to the change in tax culture that we subsequently saw in the 2000s as well. So I think, Chair, these matters are being pursued, but we can add a lot more weight behind what we're doing as a state generally, but also as Parliament and as society more generally as well. And part of what we need to get is the community mobilization to say the crooks who live amongst you, who do X and Y at a power station, eventually hurts you because you are the one who are subjected to the load shedding because they supplied the wrong parts or whatever the case might be. So greed and self-interest is of such a nature that you want to fill your pocket at anybody's expense and you don't care about people. On the vetting issue, I share your concern. I think that whole process needs to change, and I'll certainly initiate some dialogue around that so that we set up a different way, as I indicated earlier on, because retrofitting, inverted commas, or retrospective vetting is possibly not the right way to go. But also, we've got to ask, what are you vetting? If you're just going to certain databases to say how many names are there in Schlengwa's name, I mean, how many houses are in the deeds register in Schlengwa's name, or how many cars are in the harness system or whatever it's called in Schlengwa's name, or how many whatever. Is that enough in today's environment? Because people have picked up that you don't put things under your name. Many cases are indicating that. You put it in somebody else's name if you want to duck the system. Then, why didn't one pick up on the allegations? For reasons that we've indicated already. And that is, and which is illustrated by your example. You can't go and spread around things without necessarily having the evidence, but also those who have the evidence must do that which is necessary. So it's interesting that a Section 34 declaration is made a day before there's an appearance before SCOPA, because legal advice was probably given to the Ruyter to say, you better do this, otherwise you're going to run into a challenge in that particular regard. But if there's evidence, it must go to the right law enforcement authorities, and they must do whatever it is that must be done. On trust erosion as a process versus an event, you're probably right, but then, on the one hand, there is a process which indicates a decline in performance, but then an event takes place which sharpens, if you like, the contradictions. And in this case, it's the interview that you're looking into and the assertions made in that interview, all of which, by and large, can be countered. And any objective which was designed to indicate, I think, as Honorable Somyo pointed out at some stage to me, that there might be a messiah complex here. I'm the only one that can save this world. I'm the only one that can save this country because I'm the only one who knows how to do anything in respect of corporate governance or running an organization. And that's the arrogance that we should be picking up on. But like I pointed out earlier on, human beings are human beings. They can appear to be excellent people for years on end, and then there could be an event that turns them in the wrong kind of direction. So I'm not sure if there are any other questions that we're going to come back to.
With the last round, we're going to take all of them at once and the Minister will respond. Honorable Mkonto, Honorable Hatebe, Honorable Mente. So I'll request colleagues that you be brief. I'm told that we do need to be done by 2 because there's budget votes and members are expected to attend. We've already eaten into time. So Honorable Mkonto, Honorable Hatebe, Honorable Mente.
Thanks, Chair. Good day to you, honorable members, the Minister and his team. Chair, I've been answered in the 2 other questions that I wanted to pose to the Minister about the timing of the vetting, if it was really in their plans to do it. But Chair, I don't get a sense of, as the Minister was part of the hiring processes, was Mr. Durate ever exposed to any competency testing? If yes, can maybe South Africans be consoled in being given the results of that test? And we understand, Chair, that the issue of the misconducts that have been committed by Mr. Durate is up to the law enforcement agencies to take that up. But then what is it that the Minister is going to do to enable that process? Because I think the law enforcement agencies, they do need some assistance from the shareholders and Eskom itself. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Mkonto. Honorable Hatebe.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not sure whether, Minister, you are aware that one of the former board member who was part of the BLSA has confirmed being responsible for the 18 million. The Intel report, which unfortunately her colleagues were not aware of such a report. I'm asking this based on the persons responsible for interviews and also to the large extent choosing the board members. What do you make of the conduct of this former board member? Could it be that her action were really intended to influence how government conduct its business? Secondly, her actions, do you think it constitute a conflict of interest, reckless behavior, and dangerous tone in terms of having a sitting board member sitting in meetings with her colleagues without even having confidence to inform her colleagues about what she has in her possession in a form of this intel report? We now know that as early as June or July 2022, this report was available to the private sector. Now, what lesson do you think the business should learn out of this transaction? Lastly, Minister, can you assist us and point us to the right direction to real role players who are involved in corruption at Eskom so that Scopa can pursue some of these real role players in terms of ensuring that we delve deep into Eskom corruption? Please assist us, if you can, pointing us to the right direction of who are the real role players in corruption at Eskom. Thank you.
Honorable Mente.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, Chair, picking up from what Honorable Adebe is asking, the question I have is, are board members allowed to make donations for the interest of Eskom? Because if that is allowed, it's conflict of interest, and that's how the state gets captured. So how was this particular board member allowed with his organization to make donations to Eskom? That's number one. Number two, I want to make some clarity in terms of the ABB. Yes, ABB was pursued, but the instruction and the recommendations we made as Parliament was that all those companies must move out of Eskom. We can't harbor companies that are masquerading as service providers through procurement processes, yet they are stealing the money with officials. But this particular one, ABB, was defended that it has some work happening in Eskom, but that was some fictitious explanation that we were given. And that ABB to date, we do not know why it's still continuing to be operating in the spaces of Eskom after it has confirmed itself that, yes, it colluded with the officials of Eskom in inflating prices and all of those things. But number three, you made a statement, interestingly, I don't know if I didn't hear it correctly, on the system that collects financial activities of people, which was during your tenure in SARS. Or were you making an example of another country that has financial intelligence in terms of activities of taxpayers? Thank you.
Right. Thank you very much. Right, Minister, just finally, I hear your responses, but where I sort of feel that there's an area of concern, that it's seemingly that the country and ourselves here are being placed in what I can call a ping-pong match. Because you've got the CEO saying, I sent this information to these people and these entities. Minister says, no, that information, whatever he said, he must bring the proof. I hope I'm making sense. So, as things stand now, there's nothing on the table which says the allegations that were made by the CEO of Eskom were pursued. Nothing whatsoever. And that's for me the nub of the concern. Because I get a sense that let me phrase this way. You see, the April 2022 outburst along the lines that Andre will not be the fall guy. As now I'm seated here and having reflected on this over the past few days, says to me, if the minister says this started in January 2022, by April, there was some sort of information that was available in certain quarters of those who were in positions of leadership and authority at Eskom. Hence, that phrasing that Andre will not be the fall guy. And then the outburst. And so I'm raising this in this context, Minister, that I do feel that it is of particular importance on the part of the department as the shareholder representative and Eskom to investigate the circumstances of this forensic intelligence investigation, whatever it is. Because I maintain it cannot be that an SOE will be investigated, intelligence gathering around it, with private funding, and up to now the report is elusive. There's no understanding of where it started, where it ended, what it touched, what it didn't touch, who it implicates, who it doesn't implicate. And our default position is that, well, we don't know the report, we don't have the report, it was not our money. Because it touched a key strategic space, which is Eskom. What did they do with that information? Does it send us into, or does it concretize state capture version 2 as we now have it? Does it fall into the hands of private donors, private interests who are now have got an insight into Eskom because information has been so? I fundamentally believe the existence of this report is a threat and a risk to national security. To the extent to which 50 million rands was pumped into it means that those involved were very deliberate about what they wanted. They were focused. And we can't not investigate it. It has to be looked into. This is state information. In the hands of unvetted people, in the hands of private interest. I think it would be a dereliction of duty, Minister, and when we're placing it to yourselves and Eskom. This must take priority. The report must be found, it must be handed over, and its modus operandi must be pursued. How did it happen? And I think, colleagues, when we take decisions moving forward about those who must still appear, we will do so. You can't have board members running a private operation. It's in breach of fiduciary responsibility. And they must be investigated about their own competence of being directors. I know that now I'm venturing into spaces which, but the bottom line is that that risk is there. Minister, concluding remarks on your side and responses. Thank you.
I'll respond first and then give you my concluding remarks. So let me start with where you are, because we're not talking about a ping-pong match here. As I understand it, there's two parts to this. The first is we keep referring to a report, but we don't know whether it's a report or several reports or whatever form the information collated and assessed actually took. And only those that were involved in the project would know that. The second part, I agree with your concerns. So we just got to disentangle this web, as you put it. Previous board member current CEO donation report outburst, which I know affected a lot of you when it actually happened, and what are the implications for any conflict of interest, and what are the implications for fiduciary responsibility as we understand it. So I can give you we're going to need a bit of time, but I give you the assurance that that will be pursued. And because we need to disentangle that and see what its implications are. So you make a valid point there. On ABB, I think we must get one of the engineers to come so we don't get mixed up with just the one individual. Some of the equipment in power stations are provided by what they call original equipment manufacturers. And in some instances, you can veer away and go to another supplier because the part is approximately the same. But there's also, I believe, what I've been told, counterfeit parts that have now entered the scene for some time. So one senior person who was there for 20 odd years says, that unit, I can't tell you when it will break down because I don't know which parts were put in when and whether some of them were counterfeit or not. But the third point about the ABBs of the world is that they, what do you call these things? They provide these control instrumentation. And when the operators sit, you've been to a power station, in that operating room, it's that instrumentation that they're monitoring to make decisions about how a unit will be run or not run, or how hard it will be pushed or not pushed, or whether they're detecting faults or not. So I think, and in some instances, if you've already got brand X, I'm going to use an analogy, car, you won't be able to supplant it with an engine from a completely different type of vehicle, according to what I've been informed. So let's get an engineer here from Eskom who can explain how the system works, why ABB might appear to be indispensable or still part of the scene. But there might be developments there that I'm not aware of, which I will check on. On the tax financial information, that's a system that many countries have. So it's not, remember, private information is not applicable here when it comes to finances. Because if you, as a taxpayer, are registered in a particular country or jurisdiction, and you are in receipt of income, you must declare that as your income. And that income then becomes, with all the laws being applied, your taxable income, and that's where your tax is then calculated. One of the schemes that every tax authority has to deal with is where an individual or a company doesn't declare everything, and so manages the disclosure of information to reduce the tax liability at the end of the day. So collecting what in the industry it used to be called collecting third-party data is a crucial part of verification. So so the PAYE system, for example, is largely automated. So if you don't receive any interest income, you get your assessment within minutes, because your employer, i.e. Parliament, has already said person X earns a certain amount has been deducted as PAYE, certain amount went to pension, and so on and so on, and here's the details on which you can base what your calculation is for taxable income. So this is not about some naughty activity. This is about legitimate tax practice, but also the legitimate obligations of citizens to pay their taxes in a fair way like everybody else. I think your point about the board membership overlaps with Honorable Schlengwa's point, so we'll pick up all of those points as we go forward. Honorable Hadebe wants to know the real role players. If you take all the presentations made to you in Scopa, it won't give you names. It'll give you sectors, right? So somebody in the coal industry, coal mining industry, mixes coal with rubbish and deliberately supplies it to Eskom. Somebody in the oil or fuel industry pays off people at weigh bridges so that the truck that is supposed to offload the product, in fact, doesn't offload the product. Somebody signs that it was offloaded, but takes a U-turn and goes off, and somebody pays for it again. It's Eskom. If one looks at the maintenance areas of the units, you can easily identify who are the companies there and whether the same unit that Company X undertook to repair is the one that's constantly failing. So there's the contractors involved. So if you take sector by sector, inverted commas, meaning the different role players in the entire value chain, you'll be able to dissect them. And let alone any gossip about all of these things. You've had reports before you, as have other committees, which shows where the malfeasance actually occurs. And we must follow that track. And your researchers can help you do that respectfully as well. The lesson for business is they must do the due. No, he's behaving himself at the moment. The lesson for business clearly is that they have to do their due diligence properly, and they must ensure, as you've been pointing out, that there's no conflict of interest involved in the matters that you've been raising. And I'm quite willing to sit with them to develop a code of practice which ensures that we don't cross the wrong lines. And that's an offer that I'm making, which I'm sure they're hearing in one form or another. So that's a conflict of interest, but it also links with Honorable Schlengwa's point about the different roles and hats that people have been wearing in the overall scheme of things. Honorable Nkonto, there was competency testing, but that might be confidential information. We'll have to check the law. We don't just have the right to say, in a psychometric test, X person Y did like this, and so on. But we'll have to check the law and revert to you in that regard. I didn't get the point about assisting law enforcement agencies properly.
And so far as information sharing is concerned, to make sure that processes move.
So that applies to your question as well, Chair. And that is that the Hawks have told you themselves, once the interview was broadcast, they approached this former CEO. They were referred to his lawyer. They then approached the lawyer, and nobody came back to them. So the law enforcement fraternity still has the right to go back to them, and or to anybody else, and say, if you have substantive information, we want it. If you have evidence, we want to see it. And they will then have to apply their minds to what they do with that information. So in conclusion, Chair.
Please hold your conclusion 1 second. Advocate Mtibi, if there's anything you want to add, and then you'll round it off. Advocate, over to you. Sorry, Minister. Over to you, Advocate.
No, thank you, Honorable Chair and honorable members. For us, it's really just to assure the committee that the investigations conducted by SIU will proceed as authorized by the proclamations and the recently proclaimed one that would cover most or all of the stations at Eskom. But in particular, Honorable Chair, the issue around the report and the intelligence report that was produced, we raised certain questions in the presentation to SCOPA the last time we presented. So I can confirm that the investigating team will pursue that in the context of our investigation. While we focus on corruption, we will also have to focus on the maladministration and malpractice as authorized by the proclamation. Of course, looking into the applicable law and policies around how is it that the former group CEO handled this matter. So the team is looking at that, which would include, amongst others, even approaching the company that investigated, that is, if the report cannot be found anywhere, so that we can subpoena, if need be, the said report, because we believe that it will enable and assist our investigations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Advocate Mtibi. Minister, you in conclusion.
Thank you, Chair. Just on the vetting issue, it's been brought to my attention by my office that in November 2019, the then Minister of State Security wrote to me raising concerns about resistance to and non-compliance with vetting processes among some Eskom officials, and she then provided a list of those officials which we referred to the board, and that was attended to, but no similar letter was received subsequently in relation to the CEO in question. So I thought I'll just mention that as an aside. So,
Minister, one can say, because you touched on the minister, the former Deputy Minister of State Security in a meeting before us here indicated on the record that Mr. Ruyter was not cooperating with the and was refused. So you got a letter, but when we met with them on this matter, categorically that was put.
Okay, I wasn't aware of that. So let's not keep you for too long, but make the following points in conclusion. That I still believe that the majority of people working for Eskom are honest, hardworking people who want the country to succeed, who want Eskom to regain its brand, so to speak, as an efficient utility, and they understand that there's a small group of corrupt individuals in their midst who must be dealt with. And any endeavor, like the committee wants, and we want as well, to identify those corrupt individuals and deal with them would raise the morale of people working within Eskom itself. My own position, as I've said earlier on corruption is an uncompromising one, and one which indicates that I don't care what you belong to or where you come from. If you are clean, you are clean. If you have messy hands, and if there's evidence to that effect, then you have to face the consequences. And my own organization has taken very firm resolutions in that particular regard, and the necessity for renewal, both within and outside of the organization as well. The appeal that I think we need to make to those who are acting as people doing business with Eskom is please ensure that you charge the fair price for whatever service or product you deliver to Eskom, and don't overcharge because you want to buy the next fancy car, which is a habit that's being developed at this point in time. And we want honest business people to relate to businesses in the private sector, but also with the state-owned entities in particular. To Mr. De Ruyter himself, I want to point out to you that, notwithstanding issues of performance and focus, firstly, he informed me fairly late about the poisoning incident that he was subjected to. But when I did find out on about the 10th of January this year, I visited him and his family at their holiday home somewhere near Hermanus. And his wife and son that were in South Africa were with him. We had a cup of tea, and that was a mark of my human solidarity with him, to say you've been through a bad experience, and we want to show our support to you and your family, just as human beings, let alone anything else. And that, I think, is somewhere in the book as well. However, this egotistical trip that he's on at the moment is not serving him or the country in any positive way. And any notion that he has that he is this messianic or heroic figure that is going to, on the one hand, condemn all of us, but on the other hand, be the savior, but also take rather old-fashioned ideological positions in relation to both my organization, but others as well, is a misplaced area of focus on his part. And the breaking of his firm commitment when he signed the contract of employment, as I pointed out earlier, is one that no other private sector CEO does. And it's the private sector that he comes from. So that's a point that the public and the business sector in particular should actually take note of. I want to reiterate that I did not approve any so-called intelligence project in any form whatsoever, notwithstanding what Professor Makhoba said, which I think he misconstrued and misrepresented here. And it's only months later that in passing, his venture was actually mentioned to me, and I was minimally exposed to some information, but no evidence. And I was warned, in fact, that this is not evidence. I think as far as the business sector is concerned, the leadership in the business sector has played a very positive role in supporting many of the endeavors of government, and that's the positive part that we want to continue to sustain as we go forward. And it's a valuable partnership which indicates our ability to work together in the interest of the country as a whole, whilst each of us might have our specific interests as well. And finally, as I pointed out, what we want is a situation where both Parliament as a whole and the people of South Africa take a positive and firm stance on issues of corruption, and particularly those corrupt activities that impact on Eskom and its performance. That's harming our country, it's harming our country's reputation, it's harming our country's ability to attract investment into the country, to create jobs, and we need to do much more than what we are doing at the moment to tackle the scourge of corruption. So, Chair, thank you very much for this opportunity to interact with you, and in areas which I've indicated, I will revert to you. Some of it might take time, but others we will do so as soon as we can. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Minister. Colleagues, can I just make Advocate Mutibi and your team as well, thank you very much as always for being here. We will spare you a Cape Town trip next week. We're meeting virtually next week, Friday, with Dr. Mufamadi on the virtual platform. I have been in communication with him, and I've acceded to the requests that he has made, which ultimately mean we will meet virtually. And Friday, colleagues, as you recall, is our meeting day actually. So it's Tuesday, Wednesday, and Friday. So we will meet on the virtual platform as a committee with Dr. Mufamadi next week, Friday. But in terms of also managing our own time and being cognizant of Parliament's timetable, on Wednesday, we will meet as a committee to deliberate on the hearings that we have had insofar as this matter is concerned, because as indicated, we wanted to arrive at a point to make a decision as to whether we proceed with an inquiry or not. So we will make those reflections next week, Wednesday, on all the meetings that we have had on this matter. So on Tuesday, there will be no committee meeting, colleagues. So Wednesday physically. Nice try. Wednesday physically. Friday, we will meet on the virtual platform this matter. Because, Minister, I think one must say that we are not at inquiry stage yet. We were trying to piece all of this together and look at it, so we will take a decision. So, colleagues, are you fine? Everything is good? All right. People speak about 9 wasted years. Then there's also 3 wasted years. Thank you very much. The meeting stands adjourned.